Hello dear friends, and welcome back to Pillow Pasta. And this is a very special episode because this is not only one of my very favourite pastas, but also the first one I ever read. The story that shows that even the happiest place on earth can also have its dangers. This is Abandoned by Disney.
Some of you may have heard that the Disney Corporation is responsible for at least one real live ghost town.
Oh great, the very first line of the story is a contradiction of itself.
Disney built the Treasure Island Resort in Baker's Bay in the Bahamas. It didn't start as a ghost town. Disney's cruise ships would actually stop at the resort and leave tourists there to relax in luxury. This is a fact. Look it up. Disney blew $30 million on the place. Yes, $30 million. Then they abandoned it. Disney blamed the shallow waters, apparently too shallow for their ships to operate safely in. And there was even blame cast on the workers, saying that since they were from the Bahamas, they were too lazy to work a regular schedule.
Racist!
That's where the factual nature of this story ends. It wasn't because of sand, and it obviously wasn't because foreigners are lazy. Both are just convenient excuses. No, I seriously doubt those reasons were legitimate. Why don't I buy the official story? Because of Mowgli's palace.
So Mowgli stole all the money and built himself a palace? Well, I guess his bare necessities were a little higher than everyone else's.
Near the beachside city of Emerald Isle in North Carolina, Disney began construction of Mowgli's palace in the late 1990s. The concept was a Jungle Book-themed resort with a large, well, you guessed it, palace in the center of the whole thing. Mowgli's palace was a controversial undertaking from the start. Disney bought up a ton of high-priced land for the project, and there was an actual scandal surrounding some of the purchases. The local government claimed eminent domain on people's homes, then turned around and sold the properties to Disney. At one point, a home that had just been constructed was immediately condemned with little to no explanation. The land grabbed by the government was supposedly for some fictional highway project. Knowing full well what was going on, people started calling it Mickey Mouse Highway.
And then this was released in the same year. Coincidence?
Then there was the concept art. A group of stuffed shirts from Disney actually held a city meeting. They intended to sell everyone on how lucrative this project was going to be for everybody. When they showed the concept art, this gigantic Indian palace surrounded by jungle, staffed by men and women in loincloths and tribal gear, well, suffice to say, everyone flipped their shit. We're talking about a large Indian palace, jungle, and loincloths, not only in the center of a relatively wealthy area, but also a somewhat xenophobic area in the southern USA. It was a questionable mix at this point in history. One member of the crowd tried to storm the stage, but he was quickly subdued by security after he managed to break one of the presentation boards over his knee. Disney took that community and essentially broke it over its knee as well. The houses were razed, the land was cleared, and there wasn't a damned thing anyone could do or say about it.
I'm reading about how Disney is telling everyone they're going to tear down their homes, and all I can think of is, was this the inspiration for Kuzco's character from The Emperor's New Groove?
Isn't it great? It's my birthday gift to me. I'm so happy.
Local TV and newspapers were against the resort at the beginning, but some insane connection between Disney's media holdings and local venues came into play, and their opinions turned on a dime. So anyway, Treasure Island, the Bahamas, Disney sunk those millions in and then split. The same thing happened to Mowgli's palace. Construction was complete, visitors actually stayed at the resort, the surrounding communities were flooded with traffic and the usual annoyances associated with an influx of lost and irate tourists, and then it just stopped. Disney shut it down and nobody knew what the hell to think. But they were pretty happy about it. Disney's loss was pretty hilarious and wonderful to a large group of folks who didn't want this in the first place.
Ha 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 ha! 30 million! Those Disney sleazeballs will never recover from that loss!
I honestly didn't give the place another thought since hearing it closed over a decade ago. I live maybe 4 hours from Emerald Isle, so I really only heard the rumblings and didn't experience any of it firsthand. Then I read this article from someone who had explored the Treasure Island resort, and posted a whole blog about all the crazy shit he found there. Stuff just left behind, things smashed, defaced, probably ruined by the disgruntled former employees who'd lost their jobs. Hell, locals from all around probably had a hand in wrecking that place. People there just felt as angry about Treasure Island as folks here did about Mowgli's palace. Plus, there were rumours that Disney had released their aquarium stock into the local waters, including sharks.
Well, if they did that, who's going to be left to run the company?
Who wouldn't want to take a few swings at some merchandise after that? Well, what I'm getting at is that this blog about Treasure Island got me thinking. Even though many years had passed since its closing, I figured it might be cool to do a little urban exploration at Mowgli's palace. Take some photos, write about my experience, and probably see if there's anything cool I could take home as a memento. I'm not going to say I wasted no time in getting there, because honestly, it took me another year after I first found that Treasure Island article to get around to going up to Emerald Isle. Of course, over that year, I did a lot of research on the Palace Resort, or rather I tried to. Naturally, no official Disney site or resource made any mention of the place. That had been scrubbed clean.
And yet they didn't erase all traces of High School Musical.
Even odder, however, was that nobody before myself had apparently thought to blog about the place, or even post a photo. None of the local TV or newspaper sites had one word about the place, although that was to be expected since they'd all swung Disney's way. They wouldn't be out there lauding their embarrassment, you know. Recently, I learned that corporations can actually ask Google, for example, to remove links from search results, basically for no good reason. Looking back, it's probably not that nobody spoke of the resort, but rather their words were made inaccessible. So in the end, I could barely find the place. All I had to go on was an old as hell promotional map I'd received in the mail back in the 90s.
It either leads to Mowgli's Palace or Abe Lincoln's Secret Gold, I forget which.
I didn't really intend to hang on to it. It just got shoved in with my books and comics from my childhood. I'd only remembered it months into my research, and even then it took me another few weeks to locate it in the storage bin my parents had shoved it into. But I did find it. Locals in the area were no help, as most were transplants who'd moved into the beach in recent years, or old residents who just sneered at me and made rude gestures the second I managed to say, "Where would you find Mowgli's
penis? Palace! Palace! I meant palace. Okay. Why are you looking at me like that?
The drive took me through an inordinately long corridor of overgrowth. Tropical plants that had run rampant and overpopulated the area, mixed with the native species of flora that actually belonged there and had tried to reclaim the land. I was in awe when I reached the front gates of the resort. Tremendous, monolithic wooden gates whose supports to either side looked like must have been cut from giant sequoias. The gate itself had been gorged in several places by woodpeckers and eaten at the base by burrowing insects. Hanging onto the gate was a sheet of metal, some random scrap with hand-painted letters scrawled in black. Abandoned by Disney.
Oh, Jesus! God damn it, 5 Nights at Treasure Island!
The gates were open enough to walk through, but not drive. So grabbing my digital camera and the map, whose flip side showed a layout of the resort, I set off on foot. The inner grounds of the place were just as overgrown as the entranceway. Palm trees stood untended and ragged among piles of their own coconuts. Banana plants similarly stood in their own stinking, bug-riddled refuse. There was a sort of a clash between order and chaos as carefully planted rows of Panero flowers mixed with obnoxious tall weeds and stinking blackened mushrooms.
Oh wait, there's a green one here as well. The hell?
I approached the main building, the palace, only to find the outside of the building covered in graffiti where the original paint hadn't peeled and chipped away. The front doors weren't just open, they'd been taken off their hinges and were stolen. Above the doors, or the gaping maw where they had been, someone had again painted, "Abandoned by Disney."
Fuck!
I wish I could tell you about all the awesome stuff I found inside the palace. forgotten statues, abandoned cash registers, a full-fledged secret society of homeless bums. But no, the inside of the building was so stark, so bare, that I actually think people had stolen the molding off the walls. Anything that was too big to steal, counters, desks, giant fake trees, they were all resting amid this empty echo chamber that amplified my every step like a slow rat-a-tat of a machine gun.
They're firing at us!
I checked the floor plan and headed to all the locations that might seem in any way interesting. In the kitchen, every glass surface was broken, every door kicked off its hinges, every metal surface kicked and dented. The huge freezer, not even remotely cool now, had row upon row of empty shelf space. Hooks hung from the ceiling, probably for hanging cuts of meat. And as I stood inside there for a moment, I noticed that they were swinging. Each hook swung in a random direction, but the movements were so slow and small, it was almost impossible to see. I figured it had been caused by my footsteps, so I stopped one from swinging by clutching it in my fist. Then carefully letting it go. But within seconds, it started to swing once more. The bathrooms were in much the same state as the rest of the place. Just like the Treasure Island resort, someone had methodically smashed each porcelain commode with coconuts and other implements. There was about a half-inch of rancid, stinking, stagnant water on the floor, so I didn't stay there for very long. What's odd is that the toilets and sinks all dripped, leaked, or just ran freely. It seemed to me that the water should have been shut off a long, long time ago. There was plenty of rooms in the resort, but naturally I didn't have time to look through all of them. The few I did peer into were similarly wrecked, and I didn't expect to find anything there. I thought there was actually a television or radio in one of the rooms, as I really think I heard a quiet conversation coming out.
Who would you rather bang, Minnie or Daisy? Dude, seriously? Is this really the time for that?
Though it was like a whisper, probably my own breathing echoing in the silence, or just another case of sound of flowing water playing tricks on my mind. This is what it sounded like. I didn't believe it. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Your father told you. I know, that sounds ridiculous. I'm just telling you what I experienced. Why I thought there might have been someone running in that room, or worse, some vagrants who had hauled up there and probably would have knifed me.
So Rob Zombie's Michael Myers is visiting Disney World?
I looked for a place to sit down, as my legs were feeling a bit like jelly at this point. Of course, there was no place to sit down unless I wanted to recline in the broken glass. I had seen some stairs near the palace lobby, and decided to go have a seat there until I felt better. The staircase was far enough away from the front of the building to be relatively clean, save for a startling accumulation of dust. I pulled a wedge of metal off the wall, once again painted with the "Abandoned by Disney" motto I'd become so accustomed to. I placed the wedge on the stair and sat on it to keep at least somewhat clean. The stairway led downward, below ground level. Using my camera flash as sort of an improvised flashlight, I could see the staircase ended in a metal mesh door with a padlock. A sign on the door, a real sign, read, "Mascots only, thank you."
So are we going to see Freddy Fazbear down there singing It's a Small World? Because I don't think I can handle that.
This perked up my spirits a little for two reasons. One, a Mascots Only era would definitely have had some interesting stuff back in the day. And two, the padlock was still in place. Nobody had gone down there, not the vandals, looters, nobody. This was the one place I could actually explore and perhaps find something interesting to photograph or wantingly steal. I had come to the palace essentially agreeing with myself that it was okay to take anything I wanted because, hey, abandoned. It didn't take much to bust the lock. Time and decay had done most of the work for me. The Mascots Only area was a startling and very welcome change from the rest of the building. For one, every second or third fluorescent light overhead was illuminated, even though they flickered and faded randomly. Also, nothing had been stolen or broken. even if age and exposure were definitely taking their toll. Tables had notepads and pens, there were clocks, even a punching clock on the wall complete with filled out time cards. Chairs were scattered around, and there was even a small break room with an old static-filled television and long rotted out food and drink on the counters.
Well, we either stumbled into an 80-year-old abandoned room or a fully functioning McDonald's restaurant.
Eventually, I reached a black and yellow striped door with the words Character Prep 1 stenciled on it. The door wouldn't open at first, and I figured this is probably where the costumes were kept, and I definitely wanted to get a photograph of that twisted, stinking mess. Try as I might though, whatever angle or trick I tried, the door wouldn't budge. That is, until I gave up and started to walk away. Then I heard a slight popping sound, and the door creaked open slowly. Inside, the room was completely dark, pitch black. I used the camera flash to look for a light switch on the wall by the door, but there was nothing. As I made my search, I was jarred out of my sense of excitement by a loud electrical buzz. Rows of lights overhead suddenly flashed to life, flickering and fading in and out like the rest I'd passed. It took a second for my eyes to adjust, and it seemed like the light was going to just keep getting brighter until the bulbs exploded. But just when I thought it was going to reach that critical stage, the lights dimmed a bit and steadied.
I knew it! This is where they're keeping the writing staff for Phase 3 of the MCU. Okay, you finish your 10 movies, and then you can leave.
Various Disney costumes hung on the walls, fully put together like strange cartoon cadavers hung from invisible nooses. There was an entire rack of loincloths and native clothes on hangers toward the back. What I found odd, and what I wanted to photograph right away, was a Mickey Mouse costume in the center of the room. Unlike the other costumes, it was lying on its back in the center of the floor like a murder victim. The fur on the costume was rotten and shedding, creating bare patches. What was even odder, however, was the coloring of the costume. It was like a photo negative of the actual Mickey Mouse. Black where he should be white, and white where he should be black. His normally red overalls were light blue. The sight was so off-putting that I actually decided putting off the photo until the very end. I took a picture of the costumes hanging on the walls. Upward angles, downward angles, side shots to show an entire row of the frozen, putrid cartoon faces, some with plastic eyes missing. Then I decided to stage a shot. Just one of the braggled character heads on the slick, grimy floor.
What are you, shooting a brochure?
I reached for a headpiece of a Donald Duck costume, and carefully removed it so the thing wouldn't fall apart in my hands. As I looked into the face of the wide-eyed, mouldering head, a loud clattering sound made me jump with fright. I looked down at my feet, and there, between my shoes, was a human skull.
Well, this is almost a little too obvious a gag.
It had fallen out of the mascot head and shattered into pieces at my feet. Only the empty face and lower jaw remained staring up at me. I dropped the duck head immediately, as you'd expect, and moved for the door. As I stood in the doorway, I looked back to the skull on the floor. I had to take a picture of it, I had to. For any number of reasons that may seem silly, but I needed proof of what happened, especially if Disney was going to somehow make this go away. I had no doubt in my mind, right from the start, that even if this was some gross negligence, Disney was responsible for this. That's when Mickey, the photo-negative Mickey in the middle of the floor, started to get up. First sitting up, then climbing to its feet. The Mickey Mouse costume, or whoever was inside it, stood there in the center of the room. Its fake face just staring directly at me as I mumbled, "No," over and over and over.
So now Disney owns The Walking Dead as well? You media tyrants!
With shaking hands, a violently thrashing heart, and legs that had once again turned to jelly. I managed to lift the camera and aim it at the opposite creature, now quietly sizing me up. The digital camera's screen displayed only dead pixels in the shape of the thing. It was a perfect silhouette of the Mickey costume. As the camera moved in my unsteady hands, the dead pixels spread, marring the screen wherever Mickey's outline moved to. Then the camera died, went black and quiet and broken. I raised my eyes once again to the Mickey Mouse costume.
Hey!
It said in a hushed, perverted and perfectly executed Mickey Mouse voice.
Want to see my head come off?
It started to pull at its own head, working its clumsy, glove-clad fingers around its neck with clawing, impatient movements, similar to a wounded man trying to pull himself free of a predator's jaws. As it worked its digits into its neck, so much blood, so much thick, chunky, yellow blood.
Mickey Mouse, as played by Angus Scrimm's Tall Man.
I turned away as I heard the sickening tearing of cloth and flesh. I only cared about getting away. Above the doorway of this room, I saw the final message clawed into the metal with bone or fingernails. Abandoned by God. I never got the pictures out of the camera. I never wrote the blog entry about it. After I ran from that place, fled for my sanity, if not for my very life, I knew why Disney didn't want anyone to know about this place. They didn't want anyone like me getting in. They didn't want anything like that getting out.
And that was Abandoned by Disney. And as I said, it remains one of my favourite pastors to this day. It's got great writing, a great atmosphere, it's nice and detailed so you can just visualise everything clearly in your mind as if you're the one going through the palace. It's got a terrifying monster, a memorable catchphrase, and it's another corrupting innocence story, which I'm always a fan of. And thank you for joining me for this episode of Pillow Pasta. Until next time, I'm Fedora, and sweet dreams.